The Ain't No Fang podcast. From Arizona Sports, Ain't No Fang.
Hello, welcome into the newest season of the Ain't No Fang podcast, Arizona Sports Diamondbacks show. I'm Alex Weiner. I'm joined by Kellan Olson today, helping out with spring training just, 2 days away from when we recorded this. I was out at Salt River Fields this morning, so it really feels real that we finally got past football season. We're into baseball season, and with that, we have kind of a new format for the show. You will look for us once a week, at least, and certainly we will adapt to breaking news, big series. We're looking at publishing content during the regular season in the middle of the week, in between the early week slate and the weekend series. Of course, we can adjust if the Diamondbacks have this crazy series against the Dodgers over the weekend and get you something on Sundays too, but that's what we are looking at this season, and so it should be an exciting one. We'll have plenty of guests, we'll have plenty of co-hosts to go along with this, and so let's get right into it. With spring training here, I asked Kellan, who is the host of Arizona Sports at Night with Mitch Realdis, by the way, to come up with a few spring training storylines that we wanted to get into. So let's kind of go right into it. Kellan, do you have one in particular that really fascinates you about this 2025 Diamondbacks team?
Yeah, I think we got to start with the rotation, right? And just what exactly they're going to do. Mm-hmm. The way that I look at it is they have two aces, Corbin Burnes, Zach Gallen. Those guys are really good. I think Merrill Kelly is really good. I think that it's a funny thing across all sports where someone gets injured, you kind of forget how good they are. And like Merrill was fantastic for 2 straight years. So those are the 3 guys that are absolutely 100% locked into the rotation for me without a shadow of a doubt. And then we've got 4 other guys, and I don't really know what direction they're going to go. I think we can safely put Eduardo Rodriguez in there, of course, but there's just so much quality with these 7 guys. And yes, I'm including Jordan Montgomery just based on past resume, not what he did with the Diamondbacks recently, where I just can't sit here and say Erod will be in the rotation at the end of the year, 100%. I don't know, because Brandon was phenomenal. I think that you just look at his splits specifically more so than his overall numbers on the year. And he had a great year. He just wore down towards the end of the year because he was carrying the staff because everyone else was hurt. Ryan was awesome. Definitely deserves consideration at the very least. And then Jordan has this not amazing, but just a very solid and great resume where you just go was that a fluke year? Is this him starting to decrease? I don't know. And then Erod, injured pretty much all year, comes back, isn't really that great. So we'll see, but his resume is great as well. So it's obviously one of those things, Alex, where it's a good problem to have, but it's do they?
You still got to figure it out. It's a good problem. But you still got to figure out.
Do you go to 6? Do you
right? And the thing with a 6-man rotation, where it's the give and take of it, right? Great, you get your guys more rest. You lower their innings the whole year. Maybe that helps them down the stretch. At the same time, you're taking away innings from Corbin Burnes and Zach Gallen that maybe pretty useful to get them as much work as you possibly can. Plus, pitchers are very routine oriented. You get them pitching once a week. Does that change anything for guys who are used to pitching every 5th day? So I'm really interested to see if the 6-man thing, because they wouldn't be the only team that's doing that, right? The Mets have a surplus right now. The Dodgers clearly do, but they also have their injury concerns, as does every team. It's spring training. These 7 pitchers may not be the ones available come opening day. We saw that last year when Erod went down in Cactus League. So yes, it's sort of a tough problem to have, and I don't know if they have to do it this week, next week. Spring training is deceptively long. They have a little bit more than a month in order to figure that out. But if they don't go to 6, let's say, it's hard for me to see a rotation without Erod and Fott at the end of it.
That's 5 guys. You're done.
That's 5. It. And then what do you do with Ryan, who absolutely deserves the look because he was your best starting pitcher in the second half last year?
What if either guy has an awesome spring and Erod or Fott does not? I don't know.
It's hard for me to imagine Fott not in there just because what he gave you last year and what is under the hood. A lot of his expected stuff, his fit, all that stuff looked really good. And you're right. As his innings went up, he had a couple of, tough stretches in the second half of the year. And then he closed strong, the big game Brandon stuff at the end of the year. He had a really good start against the Brewers, and his last start was really good. And then you have Ryan. And it's like, you don't want to take him out there but at some point it is a numbers game. So that is going to be interesting, just how many guys they want to keep in the rotation, and would they be willing to throw guys in the bullpen? It seems hard for me to imagine those guys starting in AAA.
Isn't that the hard part, Alex? Like looking at like, just put Ryan in long relief. It's like, well, you can't just like, and then someone gets hurt and then Ryan's going to go back to like start. That's not an easy adjustment to kind of dance.
Right. Like if it's right away, the first couple weeks of the season, maybe. Yeah. But if it's after 2 months and he's thrown 45 pitches, this is his longest outing, then you've got to build him back up again. So it's different.
Can I hot take you? I would trade Erod.
Really?
I would love to see them develop young starting pitching, because this again is like coming from a fan perspective, coming from someone who's watched this team his whole life. They have had a tremendous problem with developing young pitchers. And when I remember asking Tori about it at some point last year, and it was one of those like big sigh from Tori. That's a great question. And like, this is absolutely something that's been on our mind. We understand it's a problem. We have to do this. And they've got two guys who I believe are like not only MLB quality, like MLB caliber pitchers, we'll phrase it as, which has been a huge problem for them developing. But I think both guys are good MLB starters. I think Ryan was really, really good last year. So if you could find a suitor for, but that's the tough part, because Erod was hurt and then he didn't pitch well. So like his trade value would be down.
It's the same deal with Montgomery.
Exactly.
Except for Erod, it's a much longer contract.
Yeah.
You're getting 3 more years of it, as opposed to it's an expiring. That's why I think it might be easier to trade Montgomery, just because you don't have what's tacked onto it, even if Erod is like really good the next couple of years, but we have to see it first.
I do wonder if like Ryan's just awesome in spring again. They're like, and I know it's spring, but like if Ryan's awesome in spring and they're like, are we really just going to send this guy to Reno? Like after the way he pitched last year.
It's so hard to imagine that.
Yeah.
And they have some pitching depth as well. It's not like, it's the 7 and then
Yulber Hive, assemble, stay strong.
Exactly. Showed some real traits, even if there's some seasoning left to do for him. Mena's got some seasoning left for sure, but he's somebody who's now healthy after he was hurt at the end of last season. And from all indications in instructs and whatnot, and he wasn't, in instructs, but he's been working out there throughout the offseason. He looks pretty good too. So it's a great problem to have. But it is going to be fascinating to see how they solve it, because a great problem is still a problem. Number 2, I'm going to hit
what you got.
I'm going to hit you with the bullpen with who's going to be the closer.
Ooh.
I think I'm not in the camp that they are desperate to go out and get a closer externally right now. Mm-hmm. I think if it works out that way, you can get somebody at the deadline potentially, because there are some teams holding on to their closers right now, namely Ryan Helsley in St. Louis, that may be more available at that point, and then you can pivot. But I do think they have some internal options who are really interesting, namely Justin Martinez, who was a 22-year-old rookie last year and had a 2.48 ERA while pitching pretty significant spots. And they gave him some tough assignments, especially when they had him go out there for a second inning sometimes. I think if you just have him in one spot as a closer, he's young, maybe it doesn't work, but I think that kind of puts him in a better spot than he was last year, where sometimes you're here, sometimes you're here, sometimes you get 2 innings, sometimes you get 1 inning. So I think that's a really interesting option. And then AJ Puk is another really interesting option. I kind of like having him be versatile as the big lefty who can go get other lefties, and it doesn't really matter if that's the 7th inning or the 8th inning or the 9th inning. But the guy gave up 1 run in 27 innings until that Kyle Higashioka home run at the end of the year. So I'm not in the camp that they like desperately need to get somebody externally, but of course that would help if they go out and get like a Pete Fairbanks or somebody like that. I'm obviously not against that. That would be great, because that just gives you more and more options to work with back there. But I am interested to see, like, if they do get somebody, how does that work? If they don't get somebody, who ends up winning that job? As I don't know if the committee idea that they've tried before is really the best option.
It's sort of like the starting pitching, where I'm with you and I'm not like clamoring for a closer, because they've got a lot of options. It just what can't happen is the dance of last year, because Ryan Thompson was having another really great year, and then they thrust him into the closer role, and he clearly was thrown off by it to some extent. Like, he just wasn't the pitcher that he was for his entire Diamondbacks tenure. And his like August and September were just like brutal. Like, I'm looking at his splits. His ERA by month was 1.42, 0.82, 3.38, 1.74, and then this is around when Seawald started losing the job. 6.17 in August, and then 6.30 in September, all on like even inning splits too. So he was pitching just as much as he was in those other. So that's the type of thing where I think that they have a good bullpen right now that could be great if just everything clicks into place.
Having roles is nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so for everything to click into place, you just need to have the roles. And the best way to have that role is to just go get a Helsley, go get a Fairbanks, go get whoever. If it's not going to be Puck, if it's not going to be Martinez. I have a Puck question for you because I think it's just like clearly should be Puck, but is there hesitancy to make your surefire closer a lefty? Is there
that's something I'd have to ask them.
Weird?
I'd have to ask them that.
Okay.
But in my personal opinion, I don't see why not. Okay. I like having the ability to just have him go after whoever. Like if you're playing the Phillies and Harper and Schwarber coming up in the 7th inning, go after them then. But no, not necessarily. I mean, you also have Joe Manaply, and maybe there's another lefty you could go get. Kyle Nelson maybe comes back from injury. But yeah, I don't necessarily. I just kind of like having the option of unleashing him earlier if you want to.
Sure.
And maybe that still is an option because closers are becoming a little bit more fluid in whether it's the 8th or the 9th, go after the best guys and then get your next guy in there for the 9th inning. But if you're going to lock in, okay, the 9th inning is to J-Mart or to Puck and we're building it out from there. I kind of like having the righty just because, you know, you have Manaply, but it's not clear just how deep the left-handed pool of relievers is going to be, depending on how you use certain guys in different roles.
I could get behind the idea that it's the 9th is Martinez or Puck, but it's like for J-Mart specifically, like he's a guy that like is going to just throw in the last 2 innings no matter what, where if AJ, you're facing the Freeman Ohtani part of the order or whatever, and you want to use him in the 7th or whatever, sure. then I totally...
Although Manaply is the Ohtani killer, so...
Understand that. Oh, he very much is as well. Yeah, they've got multiple options. I would be remiss for our pal Mitch if I did not mention Trey Jameson, who like had
really interesting.
Is like sort of like is there another arm back there? Because he was one of those, that really weird end of 23 year where he had a really great last close of the year starting games. And then there were 2 or 3 other young guys. It was like everyone young was like pitching really well.
In 22, yeah, he came up and Ryan Nelson came up.
In 22,
Tommy Henry came up.
You're right, yeah, and everyone was pitching well, and it was like, oh my gosh, like do the Diamondbacks have young pitching? And then it split some different ways. But he's an interesting name. Tommy John, he had it in September of 23 per Fangraphs. Like that timing is coming up. I'm sure that you and all the guys will have reporting on that from Tori in terms of what his timeline's looking like here in the next couple of days. But it would just be so much easier for the clarity's sake to go get the guy. But you can make the case that they already have the guy with 2 different guys, which is what makes the conversation so interesting.
Definitely. All right. What do you got next?
Sub with Jordan Lawler, man. Is it just really as simple as he's going to be in Reno? Like, is that it? Or is there a chance that a role emerges for him on this team? What do you think?
It depends if somebody gets hurt, I think. I think if, knock on wood, you never want to see any injuries in any sport. If somebody were to get hurt that he could fill in for, I don't think it would be like a disaster if he started in the major leagues and got some regular at-bats, right? Obviously, last year was a lost year for him. He played really, really well in a very tiny sample size because of multiple serious injuries. Then he got some extra reps in the Dominican Winter League. And now he's healthy for spring training. So that's good, is that he'll continue to build up reps. I think you just want him to play every single day before making that call eventually. So you have, your infield's pretty set already. It's Naylor at first, it's Cattell at second, it's Perdomo at short, and you have Gino at third. And you're looking for a versatile backup who can kind of do everything. That's why you bring in a guy like Garrett Hampson, because he'll compete for that. And maybe Blaze Alexander can possibly compete for that as well. Gray Kessinger is another guy they claimed because defensively he can go anywhere. So I think that's sort of the model that we're looking at for now. But if Jordan is like their best player in camp, let's say, like he just comes out swinging, then it creates some interesting problems, right? And again, a good problem, but still a problem to have. How do you use your DH spot if you want to mix and match? Can you get Jordan enough at-bats at the major league level early on to make it worth your while to have him up there and not playing every day in AAA? Yeah, because just like say it, like Gino is, like guys get characterized as an everyday player, but Gino's like an everyday player.
Gino will play 162 games. Domo will probably play, our boy Jerry will probably play 162 games. Like if they let him, he would do it. Yeah. They're not going to let him, but
the
Cattell the Cattell part of this is sort of interesting because there's a clear desire for them to give him 15, 20, maybe even more games at DH. So that opens up the second base spot, but that's not necessarily where Lawler has been. He's been on the left side of the infield. The DH part is interesting to me, and I'm glad you brought up, like, the kid is mega talented. He's been valued as a top 5, top 10 prospect for multiple years, which is like not someone claiming to know AAA or AA ball here. But my brief interpretation of this has always been the longer a prospect holds his ranking, the better that looks. Because what you'll see Keith Law have a guy like 11th when he gets drafted. And you're like, okay, great. And then by the time he's ready to hit the majors, he's not even on his top 100 anymore. Lawler has held that positioning ever since he got drafted. The traits are still basically
really tantalizing.
Everything is still
unbelievably fast. He's unbelievably athletic, and he's got to hit. He can hit the darn ball.
So everything is there. Like, everything is there for Lawler in terms of all of the promise and everything, which again opens the possibility of, like, if he hits 430 in spring, it's like, okay,
everything on the backfield all looks great. He's healthy. He's
Torrey
well.
And Mike are like, he looks like a very good Major League Baseball player right now. Then it's like, what do you do? Do you move Gino or him to DH? What do you do with Grichuk then? Because, like, Grichuk is kind of your right-handed bat there. What do you do with Pavin? There again, everything that we've highlighted that could be a potential problem for the team, we keep going. It's a good problem to have. So it's a really good sign for, like, what the team is looking like in general. But I do foresee an outcome where he's just that type of thing in camp where they're like, there's this thing that the Suns always had. PJ Tucker and Tyson Chandler tell stories of, like, their first couple practices with Devin Booker, and they were like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like, they just saw it right away. Yeah. And, like, Jordan's had a couple of camps now, I understand, but if they just see this, like, if Torrey's talking to you guys after a game being like, man, like, Jordan's been incredible this spring, he's looked so great. It's like, okay, it's time. Like, you can't have him just in AAA if he is clearly ready to be a good contributor for your team right now.
Sure. It's interesting as you look down the line, like, Gino's in his last year.
That's the spot, right?
Lawler is, getting reps at third base and at shortstop. We'll see. Everything is a will, because what if Gino balls out and it's like, he's such a good locker room guy, we kind of need that guy. So, a lot of interesting ideas there, but I don't know. There'll be plenty of Jordan Lawler coverage. There'll be plenty of Jordan Lawler coverage when we cut to it. Last one for me, and I'm also going to highlight a player who I'm interested to see, Alec Thomas.
Yeah.
Former top prospect for the team. Him and Corbin were kind of on a similar trajectory in that sense. Thomas came up a little bit earlier than Corbin. Corbin missed more time in the minor leagues with injury. And pretty early on, it was clear this guy's a special defensive outfielder. And I think they're at their best when he's in center field, because there are just some balls that he can get to that nobody else can get to. At the same time, last year was kind of like, all right, this is the breakout, because he just had a huge postseason. He hit 4 home runs. He hit arguably one of the biggest, top 3 biggest home runs in Diamondbacks history. I got to go through the list at some point. And then he comes back and he gets hurt in the first series of the season, and we don't see him again until July.
It was frustrating. And
then he comes back and he doesn't hit. He gets sent back down, gets injured. We don't see him again till the last bit of the season.
And in the middle of that, Jake is balling.
And in the middle of that, Jake McCarthy very obviously takes control of the starting center field job because he earned it. He played really well. What does the next version of Alec look like? Can we see a version of him that's lifting the ball more? Because he hits the ball hard. He hits the ball hard really on the ground, though. And that's been kind of the problem with him offensively. He's got 277 career games. He's got an OPS below 630, which is not what you'd think of. You'd think of him as a more talented hitter than that. But there's just certain deficiencies we've seen from him offensively where it's like, okay, if you can kind of get to even a league average bat, the way that you play defense, that's a really, really valuable player. And so I'm curious to see if there's any difference in sort of the identity, approach, the look of him at the plate after a pretty disappointing season in terms of play and availability.
Yeah, and doing the lineup game, it was this thing where, like, especially 2 weeks ago before Grichuk signed, it was like, okay, like maybe just like Lourdes can DH more and like you can put Alec in center and Jake in left, but then like you have three lefties and like Jake had a really fascinating year. There was the great Fangraph story that I sent you where it was just his BABIP. I don't know like what exactly like you call it for short. I didn't want to say BABIP.
It is BABIP.
It's BABIP. That's what we call it.
Yes, it is.
Just teaching me as a more novice person with all those numbers, like what exactly that number meant, what it meant in relation to Jake, and just sort of
so many holes.
just sort of
so many holes.
How volatile it can be, which we saw when his numbers really started to drop off a cliff towards the end of the year, if I'm remembering that correctly. Mm-hmm. And so Lourdes is a guy as well who is extremely volatile. He will have a 1,300 OPS in May, and then he will have a 500 OPS in June, and it'll just kind of dance around there. And then, of course, Corbin is the franchise guy. He's not going anywhere. So the room for him is there in some senses, but this is a huge make it or break it year for him. And it felt like in some ways it could have been last year as well, which is why there was a lot of noise, I think, about the 4 outfielder thing and being like, okay, these guys have value. You could trade one of them right now. So it does really feel like that for Alex, which again is like so weird to you because, and I totally agree with how weird it is because it just, you watched him play defensively 2 years ago, whenever he made his debut, exactly when he was in here. And it was just like, man, like this is just like, there's like Steve Finley for 10 years. Like that's pretty sick. And then everything happened at the plate and they had better options. There's so many teams, I think, across baseball that Alec would like start on every day. I would imagine like there are teams out there.
There's certainly some teams. Yeah.
There are teams vying for like that type of everyday center fielder. Like the Varsho trade, for example, is another one where you can look at that. And like Toronto got the surplus out. They get their own, defensive mastermind back there in the outfield. And that's what Alec could be for another team, but you want to give him a shot and they need to figure out ways to give him a shot. But Jake had a great year. Lourdes had another solid year. And then Corbin was Corbin for the second half of the year. So where do you put him? You're kind of running out of spots. I'm just glad that Torey rewarded Jake last year as he should. And that's been one of the great things about watching Torey over the years and like looking at the decisions that he makes is like, if you play well, they are going to give you a lot of time. And that's what they did for Jake and they should have.
Absolutely. Okay. So just a few things to look at, and there's going to be plenty of more. There's going to be, what spots are up for competition? Who's going to be the backup catcher? Can Del Castillo be the backup catcher? What does Corbin Burns look like when he first gets to camp? Is it everything we all imagined when he signed? So lots to get to. We will be out there pretty consistently, and we will have all the latest on ArizonaSports.com. Thanks so much to Kellan for joining, but we are not going anywhere because next we will air an interview that I did with Chris Capuano, a former Diamondbacks pitcher, now working for the Players Association, talking about the Players Trust. There's a big event coming up in Phoenix just in about a week or so, but we also talk about his early days with the Diamondbacks in the early 2000s, what it was like being with the Diamondbacks in the early 2000s, what he thinks about the current team, as well as some major league questions such as what does he think about what the Dodgers have been able to do, rule changes now that they're a few years in, what do the players think about that? So plenty of that and more coming up next with Chris Capuano. Thanks so much to Chris Capuano for joining us, former Diamondbacks pitcher, longtime Major League pitcher and all-star, and now working with the Players Association. Chris, thanks so much for joining me. How's everything going this morning?
Doing okay. I'm a little colder than you are out there in the valley. I'm here in New York City, and we've got a little snow and slush on the ground this morning. So looking forward to getting out there to the valley soon.
I'm a little concerned about how warm it's been in the valley these last few days, but that's good to hear that you'll be out here pretty soon. And, big event coming up for the Players Association with the Players Trust, the Playmakers Classic. Chris, I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit what the Players Trust is, sort of its impact, and what the Playmakers Classic has in store for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Players Trust has been around. It's coming up on 30 years now. I think next year will be the 30th anniversary. And the Players Trust, it's the official charity of the Major League Baseball Players Association. It's the only nonprofit that's really focused solely on amplifying the philanthropic impact of our members. So that's all major and minor league players. So really the Players Trust, we exist to just foster a culture of giving back, philanthropy. We try to be a vehicle for our players, some of who know exactly what they want to focus on and exactly the impact they want to make. Some who need some help kind of figuring it out, and we can kind of meet them where we're at. So that's what the Players Trust does. It really amplifies players' individual philanthropy and collectively, funds initiatives to really have a positive impact. A lot of it focused on a bunch of different causes that players care about. It could be disaster relief, it could be military, it could be you name it. But really, one of the central focuses is on supporting youth and youth development. So, the players really all rally around this notion of trying to inspire the next generation, support kids. Some of it could be baseball, softball-based programming, but we have a couple of programs that are actually classroom-based that we absolutely love. We connect classrooms around the world, actually, from all over where our players come from: Latin America, Asia, America, Europe. These kids get together and work on projects. They get messages and inspiration from major league players along the way. We also have a great baseball-inspired board game where these kids compete in tournaments. They learn math skills, they learn teamwork, and then they get to win great sort of prizes like going to home run derby, playoff games, getting on the field, meeting players. So, a lot of great work that the Players Trust does. And the Playmakers Classic, which is the event we're talking about, this is February 18th at Warehouse 215, a stone's throw away from the ballpark in Phoenix. This is really our signature annual event, right, where we bring together about 400 guests. About 100 of those will be players, current and former, for just a lot of fun to raise money for a great cause.
Sure. And on the list of those players is a handful of Diamondbacks: Corbin Carroll, Gabby Moreno, Jake McCarthy, just to name a few of them. Have you seen an increase in interest in players contributing to the Players Trust, getting involved in some of these works?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Players Trust has always been, a strong part of the fabric of what we do with our players. We try to make sure that we reach them when they're first getting into pro ball, and we just get to know them. What do you care about? What are you interested in? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? Are there any causes that are particularly important to you? We've really seen, especially with, we've always supported them individually, but especially with some of these larger initiatives that we've done, these classroom programs that really let these guys get involved in a way that's easy for them. We sort of set up a time for them. They show up. They can engage virtually, in person. They can give their, time, money, resources, however they want to contribute. We try to provide that vehicle for them. So definitely the players, this is a special vehicle for them.
Awesome. And, with, the event this year, what should people expect if they're going, if they're keeping up with it? What do you think people are going to expect?
Yeah, well, it's not going to be like a stuffy, sit-down gala. If people have ever been to these events where you have like the tables and the dinner and sort of keynote speeches, it's kind of the opposite of that. This is kind of a picture like an upscale, lounge club sort of environment. It'll be a big space, but really dynamic with a lot of things going on. So there's going to be, interactive games like a virtual long drive contest where you can win prizes. There'll be things like casino games, skee ball, just kind of things you probably won't expect to see. We'll have a great make your own trading card booth. I've seen this at some prior events we've stood up recently. Topps sponsors it. You can get these really incredible, very official and cool looking trading cards made. We'll have, spirit tastings. Former teammate and friend of mine, Adrian Gonzalez, has actually a line of beer called Calidad. So they'll be providing some product for our guests to enjoy. We've got Cedar Room, which is a local cigar lounge in the Valley. We'll have a setup there. We'll have Flecha Azul and Aspen Vodka. These are some brands that some celebrities are behind, Mark Wahlberg and others. We've got a pretty cool MC, Wheezy, right? Some of you who are Suns fans or Mercury fans will know him as the in-house talent. So he'll provide some energy and kind of guide the night along. So it's just a really fun event. A lot of great people, a lot of like-minded people throughout the Valley. And like I said, we'll have probably about 100 players there or so. Former great names, guys like Dave Winfield, who everyone knows, Bobby Bowe, and a lot of our current players as well. You mentioned Corbin, Bryce Jarvis, Jake McCarthy, Zach Gallen, Alec Thomas, Brandon Fott. So we'll have some D-backs there. And also some players from other sports as well around the Valley will join us. So it's to be a really fun time and sort of, right at the kickoff of spring training when pitchers and catchers are reporting.
Sure. Yeah, definitely sounds like it. Let's kind of go back in time a little bit to your playing days with the Diamondbacks, because, now you're Senior Director of Operations, Business and Strategy with the Players Association. And on your profile on, the Players Association website, you kind of credit your early days with the Diamondbacks for kind of seeing baseball in a different way beyond the field, right? Because it's a veteran team. You were on the team in the early 2000s, made your debut in 2003. Obviously, a lot of the guys from the World Series team still there. What do you remember about those early 2000s Diamondbacks teams and how some of the veterans kind of helped you see the game a little bit differently beyond just what goes on the field?
Yeah, I mean, I was incredibly lucky. I got drafted out of Duke, actually in '99. But the Diamondbacks, they were a great organization who, they cared about really what I wanted. Education was important to me, right? So they actually encouraged me to finish my last year at Duke, which I did, and then immediately joined them for spring training in 2000 for my first year. So, that's kind of when I first started falling in love with Arizona. I spent time in Tucson, which is where the Diamondbacks used to do their spring training. I rehabbed there multiple times from some injuries. I played for the AAA team when it was located there, and then eventually made my way up to the Valley. But the Diamondbacks, being on those teams in the early years with, guys like Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling and Mark Grace, Luis Gonzalez, Rubio, Jay Bell, Counsell. I mean, there was just a laundry list of guys who, not only were incredible players with these incredible histories. I had grown up, watching them in some cases, and it was a little bit surreal to be in spring training with them, and then eventually to be on the field with them, and watching what seemed to be like Johnson and Schilling striking out about 19 or 20 players every single time they took the mound. So those teams were special. Of course, you had the 2001 World Series against the Yankees, and all of sort of the national tragedy that was happening around that time too, where baseball was able to play a real role, I think, in kind of, bringing America together and kind of starting a little bit of a healing process. So I was in AA at that time. I remember I was in Taiwan playing in this World Cup because you couldn't be in the major leagues at that time to play for the U.S. national team. And so I was watching those games in the morning over there, and, just had a lot of D-backs pride watching them in that World Series in 2001.
Do you remember any moments that were particularly formative, talking to those guys, seeing those guys?
Yeah, I think it's, you have funny stories. Like, I think there was a time when, I used to really work on my pickoff move as a left-hander, right? And there was a bunt play on, actually, and Mark Grace was over at first. And, of course, it's kind of dumb to throw over on a bunt play where he's charging, and you actually want the batter to put the ball in play. So, I picked off, and he had to kind of dive back and catch the ball. And I think after the game, I kind of went up to him and said, hey, I usually tell my first baseman, my move can be a little deceptive. I'm kind of a cocky young kid at this point. And then after the next day out at stretch, everyone goes out and they're kind of stretching before the game, and they called me into the circle, and I think it was Matt Williams or one of the veterans on the team kind of set me straight and said, first of all, he's not your first baseman, and sort of, put me in my place a little bit. But these guys were great. They took me under their wing. Moments like plane flights, where you could pick the brain of a guy like, Randy or Curt. And, when they were good enough to take an interest and say, hey, this is how I approach it. And I just learned a lot from how none of these guys, none of these players who are at the top of their game just step onto the field and it happens by magic, right? There's a lot of preparation that goes in behind the scenes, a lot of preparation for each performance. And so just learning how to approach the game as a real professional was something that served me well and helped me play a long time.
That's terrific. But now, look at the team this year, it's a young core, but at the same time, these guys have kind of grown up together. And you look at the rotation, it's a bit more veteran laden, right? You bring in Corbin Burns, Zach Gallen's been around a while, Merrill Kelly's been around a while, Erod, Jordan Montgomery. But there are some younger guys who are still making their ways up, kind of establishing themselves as major leaguers. What advice would you give to some of those guys who are in kind of a veteran room, but are also trying to make waves themselves?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the clubhouse dynamic is such an important thing. You can have all the talent in the world, but working together as a team, supporting your teammates, learning from them, those are the things that really make teams truly great. So I think it's good you have to be confident in this game. I mean, you really have to be confident because there's so many ups and downs. And so, sometimes it's good to carry that chip on your shoulder. But, I think, there's cliche words like a growth mindset and things like that we all hear about, but that's a real thing. I mean, you can't just do the same thing, necessarily over and over again. You have to continue to adapt. You have to continue to find new ways to improve, new weapons you can deploy. And so I think being open and trying to learn from the people around you is really, really important when you're a young player.
What do you make of the Diamondbacks this year? What do you think of them going into the season?
Yeah, I mean, look, a couple of years ago, I think, watching them in the World Series against Texas was pretty special. And I think that, probably all the D-backs fans out there are looking for, trying to recapture some of that magic. But they've got a great core. They made some great additions. Diamondbacks got a great group of front office folks who work hard. They're very smart. And I think they've made some moves. I think they're in a pretty good position. I mean, the great thing about baseball is, I think in the last 10 years or so, I think we've had 8 or 9 different, champions. And so there's with the new playoff format and the talent around the league, really anything can happen. So I think D-backs fans should be hopeful.
A couple of Players Association questions for you. Now that, what have you been hearing sort of now that we're a few years into some significant rule changes just from player reps or people that you talk to around the league? What do you think is sort of the feedback that you're getting from players on how this has affected the game?
Yeah, well, I mean, the great thing is that players really take an interest in this. There's a competition committee that's made up of folks on both sides of the fence with Major League Baseball and the Players Association and players. And so I think, the players have been really vocal in giving feedback. And, some of these changes, I think have been positive. And I think players really their number one concern is that, you maintain the integrity of the game. You make sure that these rules are implemented in a common sense way. Right. And that's why you need the input of the folks that are actually on the field to say, hey, wait a second, did you think about this? Because that actually in practice, could be an issue. So it's definitely something that we spend a lot of time with when we meet with players and when we talk to them, and they're keen to really engage on the topic.
Mm-hmm. And then last one for you, it's made a lot here, obviously being in the Valley and being a division rival of the Dodgers, but you also have some frustration with, certain teams spending a lot and certain teams spending kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, from breaking records to, again, the opposite of that. What are you hearing as far as from players in terms of sort of the scale, the scope of the game right now in terms of how certain teams are using their resources versus other teams using theirs?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think what we like to see is all teams going out there from a business perspective and from a baseball perspective and just trying to compete. The Dodgers have done that, right? They have they run their business really well. They run their team well. And we try to encourage all teams to do that. Big market, small market. There seems to be this myth, that dollars translates to championships. And what we've seen, if you look at the data over the last 20 years, the competitive balance has been actually pretty solid. So, when you look at a team like the Dodgers, they're not satisfied, with sort of resting on their laurels. They're out there still trying to make moves, still trying to add pieces. And that's the kind of behavior that we like to see.
Terrific. That's the last question I had for you, but thanks so much for joining me this morning, Chris. I do appreciate the time, and it's great to meet you.
Thanks, man. I just want to give a quick shout out to, again, if folks are out there and they're interested, you don't have to go to the event physically. And of course, we welcome you to go to playerstrust.org. You can find tickets and sponsorships for the Players Trust, but there's a great auction right now that you actually don't have to be at the event to participate. So, there's things like MGM credits, Sony flat screens, PlayStations, a ton of memorabilia that's really cool. Vacation packages. I think I even saw things like Valentino purses and things like that for some folks who may be interested in that. I know one in my house in particular who may. But I just want to highlight, how much the Valley is super important. There's a lot of players. Probably it's one of the most concentrated areas of major and minor league players who call Valley home. So that's why, the Players Trust is there doing multiple events every year. That's why we're trying to really support local businesses, local products where we can. We've got folks like Arizona Foothills Magazine, Warehouse 215 is our venue. Cedar Room Cigar Lounge is one of our big sponsors. So, we really care about the area, and we hope people, come out to support from afar via the auction if they can. And just want to say thank you.
Sure. Thanks so much. Great point as far as, how many players live here, because that's been kind of at the forefront this offseason with Corbin Burns wanting to stay here with his young family. And so that's definitely a great point. So, Chris, thanks so much for joining me, and have a great one.
Okay. Appreciate it.